toxic masculinity.
Donald Glover says cancel culture is making TV boring. I love this. I love this. It's such a great perspective on this whole thing. So Childish Gambino, which is his rock star name ever since he's become a musician, I know him as Donald Glover because one of my favorite shows ever is a show called Community, and he was an actor on the show Community. Fantastic comedy actor, really great. The problem with Donald Glover, as I see it, is that he's a great actor, he's a great comedy actor, he's got a great personality, but for whatever reason, he seems to have always had this desire to be taken seriously as a very cool musician, as opposed to a sort of very funny, charming actor. He would have much rather been perceived as a cool person than a funny, charming person. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think that there is this bizarre desire, and I don't know what, like rap stars, right? Rap stars are seen as like tough and cool and like somebody to be admired. Sort of like James Bond for British guys. I think for British guys, James Bond is like the ultimate cool guy. Being like James Bond would be awesome. But one of the things that I always liked about James Bond when I was a kid is that he's cool, but he's also really funny. So, he'll see somebody, he'll see some like disaster and he'll make some offhanded comment about it that shocks the guy next to him, and he finds that funny, right? So he's actually kind of a comedian in some instances. James Bond is. But I don't like people who take themselves too seriously. And the great thing about Donald Glover is that when he was his character in Community anyway, he was very self-deprecating. I mean, a lot of the comedy came from that. And it was absolutely brilliant. And so the Childish Gambino thing that he does, he takes himself so damn seriously. I find it a little bit irritating, if I'm honest. I mean, I still like him. I loved his character in Community. Another thing about Donald Glover that I don't really like is that there is this... He's not culturally a very like hardcore black culture black guy. He's more of like a Cosby Show black guy. I mean, he speaks and talks like a typical American from a typical American town, with relatively well-educated parents and just, like me. Like he seems like the kind of guy that I would have grown up with and been friends with. And he seems to want to be respected as like a real black guy. There's this concept in black culture of like being really black or being too white. There's this kind of thing that goes on, and I find that so detestable. And look, I might be wrong about Donald Glover. Maybe he doesn't want to be taken seriously as a real black guy or something like that. But I get that sense from him. And I even actually like his music. I've liked his music ever since I found out he was even a musician, which is before he blew up, right? I was like, crap, that guy does music. And I was watching some of his videos. I thought, actually, it's pretty good. I still think he's a good musician. But yeah, and whatever. He's creating a brand for himself. I didn't like that he left Community to go be a big music star, but whatever. That's what he does. That's what he wanted to do. That's what he is. But... And one of his biggest songs, his biggest music video, was something about, being black in America, and it was like this racist thing, and I kind of lost a lot of respect for him for that because, he appeared to become this kind of like, or express these kind of woke views about race, and I just thought, okay, man, like, you've never had a bad day in your life. Like, your whole life, you've been a reasonably well-off. Like, I looked into his past, and he's like, he had a decent life. Like, he didn't have a bad life. It wasn't like he was the victim of racial abuse in his youth. He lived a good life. His life was always very good. And so to sit here and say like, oh yeah, white people are so bad against black people and black people are so oppressed and all this kind of crap, it's like, and I don't think I've ever heard him say anything like that in an interview, but his music video kind of showcased this, and it was a little bit of a scandal. scandal. It wasn't really a scandal. It was just kind of like, all right, he was trying to make this provocative statement through his music. And it's like, you've had a very good life. White people have always been good to you. This idea that white people are bad, is not true. Is not true. So that kind of pissed me off. But now maybe he's somewhat redeeming himself, because although this isn't about race or anything like that, it's about cancel culture. At least we see that he has a decent perspective here on cancel culture, and he can see that cancel culture is a problem. So he admits that TV films are boring because people are afraid of getting canceled. And this is something I hadn't really considered before, the fear of getting canceled. My perspective on the reason that TV shows and films have become boring, and I've postulated about this quite a lot myself, is that people want to go to their Hollywood parties and talk to their Hollywood friends about their Hollywood shows. And there's this kind of one-upsmanship in Hollywood, like, oh, I made this amazing TV show that explores the problems with race in society and how, evil police officers are and stuff like this. And oh, really? Oh, well, I made this amazing TV show about feminism and how abortions are so great and liberating and all this kind of stuff, right? So everybody's always competing about who's going to make the next TV show or movie that signals their virtue the strongest, right? And I feel like that's how Hollywood works, right? It's like a clique. It's sort of like high school. You get your popular kids, you got your nerds, you got your athletes, your sports stars, and all of these, the kids that are in student government are always trying to one up each other on how woke they can be out here in Hollywood. And so that's why you're getting a lot of these TV shows made this way. And another thing I've noticed that's really annoyed me, which Donald Glover probably would not agree with me on, is that they tend to be hiring a lot of people who I don't think are the best actors for the parts, because they're trying to sort of inject racial diversity into everything. So you can have a project, like I noticed there was some project on Netflix that was set in like the Renaissance, and I'm looking at this I don't know what it is, trailer of some TV show, and it's like on some kind of a ship, some kind of like a pirate ship, but the captain of the ship is a black woman. I'm just watching this and I'm thinking, how is it set in like the Renaissance times and the captain of the ship is a black woman? That doesn't make any sense. And it's not a pirate ship; it's like a merchant ship of some kind. It just like it didn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense. But Hollywood wants to inject all this virtue signaling crap, and this racial diversity and stuff like that into their films, and their films become anachronistic. But most importantly, I think they become boring, like Donald Glover is saying. They're so focused on this virtue signaling political part of filmmaking, and that they're forgetting just to tell good stories, right? So they've got, I think it's actually easier to write a good story, when you have solid, tight parameters. So when you say, okay, this is the world within which you're writing a story. Now go, right? These are the different elements you have to insert and make it work. That somehow, that kind of restriction actually somehow kind of triggers creativity. It ignites creativity in people. If you tell somebody, write the best story of all time, and you don't give them any parameters at all, it's much, much harder to write a story than if you say, okay, it's going to be set in Paris in 1600, and these are the events, these are the circumstances. You're going to write a story about a girl, and you give them all the elements. Then it's much easier for people to write a story, right? Then, okay, I know where I am, and then boom. So when you're writing, one of the most important things about writing is setting parameters for yourself, like trying to figure out what is the world in which we're living, who's the villain, what do they want? You got to ask yourself all these questions to write good stories. And what you're doing by asking all those questions, you're setting up all the parameters, right? And then once you have the parameters all set up, then the story kind of writes itself a lot of times. But in this case, I don't think it works like that. So what they're doing, instead of setting up the parameters of the storytelling, what they're doing is they're saying, this is going to be the race of the characters. And we're going to set it, here are some of the parameters, but then you've got to inject all this racial stuff, and we got to talk about feminism, and we got to put all this kind of stuff in. And once you start getting into this political arena where you're starting to express political ideas, a lot of times that actually that actually derails the story, that actually messes things up a lot of the times, because you're no longer trying to tell a good story, you're trying to express a political message. Sometimes that can be done well. There are instances when I've written great stories with political messages, but the vast majority of the time, I think most writers are derailed by that. Most writers can't seem to do that very well. What would be better is if they just wrote a good story. Now, do you have to have some kind of morality in your story? Yeah. But here's the thing about that. Most people already know what is good and what is bad, right? And I think, you know what? I've just had a bit of an epiphany, so maybe I'll express this to you guys. Everybody knows what's good. Everybody knows what's bad. So to make a character do the right thing or struggle to do the right thing is very easy if you're on the same page as the people watching the film. If, on the other hand, you want to express to the people in the audience that what they think is not actually what they think is good isn't good, and what they think is bad isn't bad, and you try to make a film that actually contradicts the audience's perception of what good and evil is, then a lot of times they'll be watching the film or the TV show and they'll be confused. They won't understand what the hell this show is about, because your perceptions of what's good and evil are different than what people watching the show's perceptions of good and evil are, and they won't understand it, right? They won't understand what the motivations of your characters are. They won't understand what the intentions of your characters are, because they won't understand who's good and who's bad, or what anything's about, because instead of working within the parameters of already existing morality and ethics that we already have here in America, you're going into this like bizarre idea of what is good and what's bad. And actually, I think that's what the Wachowski brothers ended up doing wrong. So the Wachowski brothers are these atheists, and they have a very specific set of values that they believe that are completely contradictory to everything that most people believe is good and most people believe is evil. And they knew that when they were making The Matrix. So that when they made The Matrix, they actually tried to circumvent they tried to use the code of ethics that they knew everybody else had to make a movie that expressed certain messages that they liked. And then when they did that movie about the anarchist, which I can't really remember, the Guy Fawkes one. They made the Guy Fawkes movie, the name of which I cannot remember. They did the same thing, right? They tried to use certain kind of elements of morality, and their attempt in those movies, I think, was to kind of shift morality of people in a way that they liked a little bit better. But once they had made those two films, they went on to make a string of failures. And the problem with their later films and TV show and different projects they were doing is that they just basically abandoned the morality of regular people, and they just kept injecting their own morality into everything without even considering how people were going to perceive it, I don't think. And so it just got weirder and weirder, and their stuff became less and less popular, and they're now kind of failures, really. I mean, the Matrix was obviously a huge success. Their follow-up to that, the Guy Fawkes film, was also a success. But then everything else was kind of a failure after that. They're kind of these weirdos that everybody just ignores. And I think all of Hollywood has kind of gotten that direction. They don't have the same moral structure as the Wachowski brothers, but they do have their own sort of woke morality that it's just not popular. Nobody perceives the woke morality and goes, yes, that's what I want to teach my kids. I mean, maybe a few people do, but I mean, it's just wrong. And what you end up with is stories that just don't make any sense. You're not paying attention to the story, and when you do pay attention to the story, you're just filling it with all this propaganda, and it doesn't make good stories, doesn't make good stuff. So, and this guy's finally recognized this. Actor and Grammy award-winning musician Donald Glover says television shows and movies are becoming increasingly boring because people are afraid of getting canceled. Glover, also known by his stage name Childish Gambino, made the comments via his official Twitter account. He says, saw people on here having a discussion about how tired they are of reviewing boring film and TV shows. We're getting boring stuff and not even experimental mistakes because people are afraid of getting canceled. So they feel like they can only experiment with the aesthetic, like with how the film looks. Also because some of them know that they're not good. Well, that's right. And this is an idea that I hadn't really considered, that a lot of these people maybe they want to do other stories, but they know they can't do those stories because they're afraid if they do them, they'll get canceled, right? And so that they go the safe route of making the woke material that maybe they don't even want to make. With the people that he says, some of them know they're not that good. I do think that there is a big problem right now in Hollywood of hiring people, like I said before, because they're black or because they're gay or something like that, or because they're a woman. And I mentioned this before on the show. I've worked for female directors, and all but one time, the female director was a total psycho, right? At least in my experience, that tended to be, I think, this is my perspective, this is my perception of it, is that these women wanted to be taken seriously, and they thought that the way men are taken seriously is that you act like assholes. But almost every director I've ever had that's been a man has been like a decent person, has been like a respectable person, nice to everybody, respects the crew. I mean, you do get a-hole male directors as well, but for the most part, you get pretty chill people. But these women that I've had directing are just very aggressive. Oh, Valeria's working on a project with The Weeknd. It looks like she's asking me if this is The Weeknd. I don't actually know. I don't think it's him actually. Hey, doesn't matter. Yeah, yeah, and these women, they're very angry. They act very angry. They act very assholish because they think that's how they're going to get respect. But as I've said before, when men do this or women do this or whomever, it doesn't really matter what your gender is. People are nice to you to your face because they don't want to get yelled at. They don't want to get fired. They don't want you to like lose your mind. They're scared of you in the sense that people are scared of crazy people. Right? They're not scared of you like, oh, if I get in a fight with this person, I'm going to lose. They're scared of you like, ugh, I don't want to deal with this, But then when they go home at night and they talk to their wife or husband or whatever, and their spouse says, hey, how was your day? They're just like, my director is such an asshole. They're going to talk about you poorly behind your back. So, I think this idea of hiring people because they're a woman or because they're Hispanic or because they're black or because they're gay or something like this, it will only end in disaster. You have to hire people because they're good. Is it possible to find a good female director? Yeah, it is. It's just very unusual. It's just very rare, which I actually think makes really good female directors kind of special in a way. Do you get good black directors, good Asian directors, good? Of course you get directors of every kind of type that are very good. But the vast majority of really great directors are white men, and that's not about the world being racist. That just turns out that's just how things are. If we find in 10 years that, a bunch of Chinese women start directing films and they turn out to be way better than, any male director ever was, I'll say, okay, Asian women, turns out they're the best directors in the world. I don't really have a problem with that. But that hasn't been the case so far. And this idea of not allowing white men to direct because they're white men is ridiculous. We're going to take this pool of people who turn out to be the best at a particular job. We're going to say, you're not allowed to do that job anymore. And so, you are, and this is true of writers. This is true of directors. This is true of actors. This is true of every kind of aspect of filmmaking. They're trying to supplant all the white men with every other kind of group, right? Unless you're gay. If you're a gay white man, you can do it. And so you're getting inferior talent is another big problem. And so he's not going that far in saying that, but a lot of people went nuts after he posted this. A lot of people were just like, oh, Donald Glover isn't woke. We don't like him. So now Donald Glover is at risk of getting canceled. But anyway, the problem with me is that if I got to not do Hollywood stories, because if I do Hollywood stories, I have too much of a strong perspective on all the Hollywood stuff. So as entertaining as this is for me, I do think we should move on to the next story. Unfortunately, this story is also about famous people, but it's not about Hollywood, so I'll be quick with this one. Meghan and Harry partner with woke Procter and Gamble. So this is, I imagine, to be expected. Oh, the reason I actually wanted to post this was that let me go to YouTube, go to Procter and Gamble. let's see if they have a. There we go. I saw recently that there was a Toxic Masculinity, weekdays 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific.